This is the video that most channels are afraid to make, and I understand why. The question of whether any group of people is genetically smarter than another is one of the most politically explosive topics in modern science. It intersects with the darkest chapters of the 20th century, when pseudo-scientific claims about racial superiority were used to justify genocide. It triggers accusations of racism from one side and accusations of political correctness from the other. And it touches on a subject that most people would rather not discuss at all. But the data exists. And ignoring data because it makes us uncomfortable is not science. It is cowardice. So let us look at what the data actually says, what the leading hypotheses actually propose, what the criticisms of those hypotheses actually are, and what we can and cannot conclude from all of it. No agenda, no ideology, just the evidence. If you find these stories fascinating, make sure you subscribe to Bloodlines and Borders. The starting point is a statistical observation that is not seriously disputed by any mainstream researcher. Ashkenazi Jews score higher, on average, on standardized tests of verbal and mathematical intelligence than any other ethnic group, for which reliable data exists. The estimates vary depending on the study and the specific tests used, but most researchers place the average Ashkenazi IQ somewhere between 107 and 115, compared to a European average of roughly 100. This translates to a difference of roughly 0.5 to 1.0 standard deviations, which in statistical terms is substantial. This elevated average does not mean that every Ashkenazi Jew is a genius. IQ is a bell curve. It means that the proportion of Ashkenazi Jews at the high end of the distribution, the people scoring above 130, above 140, above 150, is significantly larger than what you would expect from population size alone. And this is exactly what we see in real-world achievement data. Ashkenazi Jews make up roughly 0.2% of the global population, but have won 22% of Nobel Prizes. They account for roughly 40% of Nobel Prizes in economics, over 25% in physics, over 25% in medicine. They make up a disproportionate share of mathematicians, physicists, chess grandmasters, and successful entrepreneurs. As we covered in our Nobel Prize video, the overrepresentation is not subtle. It is over 100 times what population size would predict. The question is why? And there are three major categories of explanation. The first is culture. This is the explanation that most people find comfortable, and it has significant merit. Jewish religious life has been organized around text study and intellectual debate for over 2,000 years. The Talmud is not a book of answers. It is a book of arguments. Rabbis are recorded disagreeing with each other, challenging each other's logic, and refusing to accept conclusions simply because an authority figure declared them. This practice created cognitive habits, rigorous analysis, comfort with ambiguity, skepticism toward received wisdom, that happen to be exactly the skills required for scientific research and intellectual innovation. In traditional Ashkenazi communities, the most respected man in the village was not the wealthiest or the strongest. It was the best scholar. Families competed to marry their daughters to the most promising students. Social status was earned through learning, not land or military service. Jewish male literacy rates in medieval Europe exceeded 90% at a time when Christian literacy was in single digits. This was not coincidental. Jewish law required fathers to educate their sons, and the communal structures enforced this rigorously. When secular universities finally opened their doors to Jewish students in the 18th and 19th centuries, a population that had been training for abstract intellectual work for a millennium was unleashed on the tools of modern science. The result was explosive. If you find these stories fascinating, make sure you subscribe to Bloodlines and Borders. The second explanation is historical. For most of their history in Europe, Ashkenazi Jews were excluded from land ownership, barred from most professions, and confined to a narrow set of occupations that rewarded cognitive ability, moneylending, trade, medicine, law, and estate management. Success in these occupations correlated with higher income. Higher income correlated with more surviving children. And because the community was largely endogamous, marrying within the group, any advantage in cognitive ability would have been amplified across generations. Meanwhile, those who failed economically were more likely to leave the community through conversion, assimilation, or poverty. Over centuries, This created what sociologists call occupational selection, a process that progressively shaped the cognitive profile of the population that remained. The restrictions designed to marginalize Jewish communities may have inadvertently sharpened the cognitive abilities of the population that endured them. The third explanation is genetic, and this is where the conversation becomes genuinely controversial. In 2005, a paper titled Natural History of Ashkenazi Intelligence was published by Gregory Cochrane, Jason Hardy, and Henry Harpending. The paper proposed that the high average IQ of Ashkenazi Jews has a genetic component that was shaped by natural selection during the medieval period. Their argument goes like this. Between roughly 800 and 1650 CE, Ashkenazi Jews in Europe were confined to cognitively demanding occupations. Success in these occupations meant higher income, more surviving children, and greater reproductive fitness. Because the community was genetically isolated through endogamy, any genetic variants that enhanced cognitive ability would have spread through the population. The same population bottleneck that produced elevated rates of Tay-Sachs, Gaucher disease, and other genetic conditions specific to Ashkenazi Jews, the authors argued, may also have produced elevated cognitive ability through identical mechanisms of genetic drift and selection in a small, isolated population. The paper went further, proposing that specific Ashkenazi genetic diseases, particularly the sphingolipid storage disorders like Tay-Sachs and Gaucher disease, might actually increase neural growth in carriers who have one copy of the gene rather than two. People with two copies develop the disease. People with one copy, the paper suggested, might receive a cognitive boost. This would explain why these diseases are maintained at high frequency in the Ashkenazi population instead of being eliminated by natural selection, because they are providing an advantage to carriers even as they harm people who inherit both copies. This hypothesis has been met with fierce criticism. The geneticist David Goldstein of Duke University acknowledged that Jews do tend to outperform on certain cognitive tests, but argued that cultural and environmental factors can explain this without invoking genetic selection. The geneticist Adam Rutherford pointed out that none of the disease genes highlighted in the paper are associated with brain function or cognitive ability in any genetic database. Stephen Pinker of Harvard called the paper a reasonable hypothesis that could be true, but noted that the evidence was circumstantial and that the genetic mechanism had not been demonstrated. The Southern Poverty Law Center has described the authors as having a long history of promoting race science. The honest assessment is this: the Cochrane hypothesis has not been proven. The proposed genetic mechanism linking sphingolipid storage disorders to enhanced cognition has not been demonstrated in any laboratory experiment. No specific intelligence genes unique to Ashkenazi Jews have been identified. And the leap from medieval occupational patterns to measurable genetic effects on IQ requires assumptions that have not been empirically validated. But the hypothesis has also not been refuted. The statistical overrepresentation is real. The occupational selection pressures are documented. The population bottleneck is genetic fact. And the cultural explanation, while powerful, has a gap. East Asian populations also have cultures that intensely value education, scholarship, and academic achievement, and they also score above average on IQ tests. But they do not show anything close to the same degree of overrepresentation in Nobel Prizes or other measures of exceptional intellectual achievement. This suggests that culture alone may not be a sufficient explanation, though it does not prove that genetics is the missing variable. If you find these stories fascinating, make sure you subscribe to Bloodlines and Borders. There is one more factor that deserves attention, and it is often overlooked. Timing. For most of their history in Europe, Jews were legally excluded from universities, professional guilds, and public life. The emancipation of European Jews in the 18th and 19th centuries opened doors that had been sealed for 1,000 years. When those doors opened, the effect was instantaneous. Within a single generation of gaining access to secular universities, Jewish students were achieving at extraordinary rates. Albert Einstein published his 4 revolutionary papers in 1905, barely a generation after full emancipation in the German-speaking world. In Hungary, Jewish students made up a quarter of university enrollment despite being 5% of the population. In Vienna, Jewish physicians dominated the medical faculties. What happened was not that Jewish people suddenly became intelligent. It was that a population with centuries of accumulated intellectual culture and cognitive habits shaped by Talmudic study was suddenly given access to the tools of modern science. The dam broke. The water had been building for a millennium. And the flood has not stopped since. The Holocaust destroyed the communities that produced this explosion of achievement. 6 million Jews were murdered, including an incalculable number of scientists, scholars, and potential Nobel laureates. The intellectual centers of Ashkenazi life, Warsaw, Vilna, Budapest, Vienna, Berlin, were annihilated. That Jewish intellectual achievement continued after the Holocaust, driven by emigrant scientists who had fled to the United States, Britain, and Israel, speaks to the depth and resilience of the culture that produced them. So are Ashkenazi Jews genetically smarter? The answer, if you are honest, is that we do not know. The cultural explanation is powerful, but may be incomplete. The genetic hypothesis is plausible but unproven. The historical explanation adds context but does not resolve the underlying question. What we do know is that a population of roughly 10 million people, 0.2% of the world, has produced an outsized share of the intellectual achievements that define the modern world, and that the full explanation for this phenomenon almost certainly involves a combination of culture, history, genetics, persecution, and opportunity that is unique to the Ashkenazi experience and may never be fully untangled. What we also know is that the question itself makes people uncomfortable, and that discomfort has been used by both sides to avoid engaging with the evidence honestly. Racists use Ashkenazi IQ data to justify their own hierarchy-obsessed worldview. Anti-racists avoid the data entirely because they fear where it leads. Neither approach is intellectually honest. The data exists. The question is legitimate. And the answer, whatever it turns out to be, tells us something profound about how culture, history, and biology interact to shape human potential. The fact that the same population that was confined to ghettos, expelled from countries, and nearly exterminated produced a disproportionate share of the scientists, writers, musicians, and thinkers who built the modern world is not evidence of supremacy. It is evidence of resilience. And that distinction matters more than any IQ score ever could. If you find these stories fascinating, make sure you subscribe to Bloodlines and Borders. Thank you for watching. If you want to go deeper, the next video on your screen is one you won't want to miss. I'll see you there.